So as Eduardo said, I'm going to be presenting research that I conducted from 2017 to 2018 in southeastern Peru. So first, I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about the place where I work for 18 months. I live here in this research station that it's called Los Amigos. It's, as you can see, it's located in a high terrace, approximately 60 meters above the Madre de Dios River. So after I finished my master's thesis, I really wanted to come back to the forest. I enjoy it really a lot, actually, being surrounded by forests, understanding and learning more about the biodiversity. So I spent here 18 months, and I was working as a research coordinator in this station. And I was working in several different projects, but also I was in charge of receiving all these different field researchers that came from different parts of the world to study from plant insect interactions to, for example, the reproduction biology of two different tamarins. The emperor tamarin, one of them, it's actually pretty rare. It's distributed around the Madre de Dios region, but you don't see it like everywhere. So during a normal day at Los Amigos, I was actually working with rotten fish. I was working with dung. I was dissecting and observing the behavior of dung beetles for many hours with all the mosquitoes around me. But one of the species that I studied was this dung beetle called Coprophenis lancifer that feeds on rotten or dead meat. But also I was whenever I was not dealing with these a little bit disgusting smells with dung and rotten fish, I was working doing point counts, assessing bird diversity. I was also working with trying to follow species of monkey, the Saki monkey, and also I was conducting camera trap wildlife monitoring. So this is one of the projects that I will be presenting today. So when and it's about birds, of course. So when we think about birds in the Amazon, I bet you also, the first bird that can come to your mind might be any of these really conspicuous bird species. So we have like the harpy eagle, we have like colorful but also super noisy macaws, we have toucans, we have colorful herbivorous birds like tanagers. We have an incredible diversity of antbirds and anthrash species over here. We also have like the favorite of Professor Betty, maybe the manatee. So we have like a great diversity of birds in the neotropics that are actually some of the most studied bird species. But we also have like not very colorful birds that are actually, we're not going to see them flying under around the understory or above the canopy, but they're mostly using the lower forest strata. So these are the ground dwelling or terrestrial birds that I will be talking today. So when we talk about terrestrial birds in the Amazon, we're mainly focusing on three groups mainly. We have the trumpeters. We also have crassids, which are the group of birds that are mostly targeted for hunting. So they're also commonly known as the game birds. And we also have tinamous, which are these kind of like chicken like form or shape of birds. But we also have like a smaller birds such as the pigeons and the doves, for example. So all these birds have important roles in the ecosystem. They feed on seeds, so they are important seed predators. They also disperse the seeds of different tropical trees and shrubs. Therefore, their absence will likely impact forest regeneration in the Amazon. And also, as I mentioned, they are also used as a protein source for different local or indigenous communities that inhabit the region. Also, these species attain peak diversity in the Amazon. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos of camera traps that I collected again here at Los Amigos Biological Station. So these are, I'm going to show you different species of tinamous. As I mentioned, this group of terrestrial birds, they increase diversity in the Amazon. And one of the examples are the family Thinamidae. So there are 47 species that are distributed along the Neotropics. But from these 47 species, actually 22 of these tinamous are found in the Amazon basin. So we can again acknowledge how diverse this group of birds are. So another important thing about these terrestrial birds is that they are very camouflaged with the rainforest. As you can see, it's very hard to see them if you're walking around the Amazon. Also, they have a very elusive behavior. They have sometimes infrequent vocalizations. Some of the species are in low density. So all of these different characteristics make terrestrial birds a group of birds that are difficult to study. There also there is a lot of methodologies that are used to effectively monitor and assess the quality and behavior of these birds. But we know that camera traps are a tool that are being used to assess terrestrial animals, including mammals, but also birds. And there are most of these camera trap studies actually focus mostly on mammals, and there are very few that target terrestrial birds. There are some studies that have been conducted in Central America. There are a couple in the Atlantic forest in Brazil, and others in Southeast Asia. So, to our knowledge, there are no published study of terrestrial birds using camera traps in the Amazon basin. Actually, this research was conducted again at Los Amigos. And here, of course, the researchers were focusing on mammals. However, they listed some of the terrestrial bird species that they found. And of course, they were not included in the analysis, as you can see in that label. But there are other techniques to assess terrestrial birds. So the other techniques are line transect techniques. But due to the limitations of this method, sometimes the species are not accurately identified, or they're not able to be identified at the species level. So that's why, for example, here we have, and actually the tinamous are the group of birds that are even more difficult to identify to the species level, because they have all similar shape, like similar colors. So all these different characteristics make this group very difficult to study and to differentiate, and that's why many studies just group all the species to the genus level. So we actually are lacking of information about the ecology of tinamous. So we also know that camera traps are used to assess changes on the community composition of different habitats. And also we know that in the Amazon, the flooding regime is an important factor that structure and differentiate ecological communities in different forest types. We know that it has been described that animals have these seasonal lateral movements where they go to these different other types depending on the flooding situation. And this allows them to be able to access or use the resources that are available during that particular period, could be dry or wet season. And also we know that camera traps are also being used to assess the activity pattern of the species. So for example, here we know also that temporal activity segregation is an important mechanism that allows the coexistence of sympatric and also ecological similar species. So this happens because this reduces competition, interspecific competition. It also avoids predation and also allows an increase of niche partition. But also camera traps, this is the other video I have to show you. They can also provide and give you important ecological information of the species that are rare and are difficult to study. Again, here we use camera traps and we were able to see what we think is the growth of curacao chick. I don't know if anybody of you is able to differentiate between adult like male and female of these species, but we capture a bird of curaçaos in the month of January, and then some days later, we were able to see a chick and an adult over here. And it was super interesting to us to see like this behavior of the chick of being like actually just located under the tail of the mom. And after more or less 1 month, we were able to see again another chick and then the adult curacao. We suspect that it's the same individual. We don't know like this could actually happen, but I mean the chick is actually grown more, and again we see like this feeding interaction of the mom and the chick. So I mean with camera traps we can obtain like a lot of valuable information. So the objective of this research was to use the camera trap and assess the composition of terrestrial avifauna at Los Amigos. We also wanted to see if there were any changes on the community composition between major habitat types and also among seasons, and also to determine daily activity patterns of these terrestrial bird species, and if there were any differences that can help us explain the coexistence of ecological similar species. Again, this is the study site. This is Los Amigos. It's located in the confluence of the Madre de Dios and the Los Amigos River, which is this one. Here we have a remote sensing imagery that is basically telling us that the blue color is the two dynamic plains that are next to a big extent of terra firma forest, which is in red and yellow. Also, there are some bamboo patches that are within the terra firma forest and palm swamps that are located within the floodplain forest. Unfortunately, these areas, and it's very common throughout the Madre de Dios region, they're threatened by illegal gold mining, which is spreading very, very fast. So what we did, we deployed 8 camera traps that were distributed in the 2 main habitat types, terra firma and floodplain forest. They were deployed for 16 consecutive months, and also during that period we covered the peak of the wet season, then the peak of the dry season. And we used the capture rate to be able to assess changes of community composition among seasons and also between habitats. So some of the results, so we got 505 captures throughout 2,977 drop days. We found 16 terrestrial birds that were from 7 different families. We can see that tinamous had contributed the most to the richness of terrestrial avifauna at Los Amigos. And we had 2 species that had the highest capture rate, which are the trumpeter and also the gray fronted dove. And we also had some vulnerable species, such as the gray tinamu. We also have the very rare rufous-vented brown cuckoo. We also conducted a refraction analysis to assess the community richness, if that differentiate or vary among seasons and between habitats. We can see that the refraction curves while comparing the different seasons, they have like very similar shapes. Whereas when we are comparing the richness of species among terra firma and floodplain forests, we can see that terra firma had a slightly higher number of species compared to floodplain forests. And also these these curves tell us that with the effort that we had was enough or adequate to sample the species richness in the area. So as I mentioned, we use the capture rates to study community composition changes among different habitats. So we use the non-metric multidimensional scaling using the bright filter disparity. And we use Adonis to test for statistical significance. And even though we didn't find a statistical significance in this analysis, we can see that there is a trend there. We can see two clusters corresponding one to each habitat, and we can see that the species that are mostly located in the terra firma forest are only tinamous species. So these can suggest that there might be an overlap in habitat use of the tinamous species in the study area. We also use the capture rates to compare species habitat associations, and we found that only Tinamous guttatus, so the white-throated tinamou, differed between habitats, and it was only located, preferring actually terra firma forest rather than floodplain forest. We did the same analysis to compare community composition among different seasons, and we didn't see any sort of differences or changes in community composition among seasons. However, we wanted, it's important to mention that the capture rates that we got during the wet season were higher for most of the species. And this correlates with the fact that in a tropical forest, the peak of fruiting season occurs mostly during the wet season. So these numbers can corroborate that probably during that season, the birds were benefiting from the availability of seeds or fruits that could have fallen on the floor during that period. And also here showing that these 5 species that were clustered in the terra firma habitat, in the results that I showed you before, were basically only found in terra firma forest and not in floodplain forest. So I also conducted this daily activity pattern and overlap activity. As I mentioned, the segregation of activity patterns are important. It's an important mechanism that allows coexistence of sympatric and also ecological similar species. So this analysis basically is giving us an overlap coefficient, that ranges from 0 to 1, being 1 highly overlapped. And the gray shading here is indicating the overlap of activity. So I conducted this analysis with the tinamous because they are sympatric. They are ecologically similar species. They have same morphology, and they are mostly feeding on the same resource, even though they're in the same family. So I suspected that there was going to be some sort of temporal activity segregation in these species, even though there are 11, I didn't mention it, but there are 11 species, and we registered 8 of those in the area. And so I conducted this overlap activity between Tinamous guttatus and Cryptorellus cinereus. These 2 species were only found in terra firma forest. So when we conduct the analysis, we see a high activity overlap. And I also conducted the analysis with Cryptorellus undulatus and Cryptorellus cinereus because there are 2 species of the same genus, almost the same size. And here we can see that the overlap coefficient is less. And also we can see that the Cryptorellus undulatus has like a more diurnal activity rather than crepuscular in comparison with the other. So these results suggest that probably tinamous have a more fine scale niche partitioning. Maybe they are using specific resources or of their the habitat that they use. That could be important to uh, to determine what are the mechanisms that allow the coexistence of all these different birds. And actually, I only found one paper. This is the study that was conducted in the Brazilian Atlantic forest that used camera traps to study the co-occurrence and activity patterns of two tinamous. And again, they show high overlap of activity. And again, the conclusions of this research is that like there, we need more studies that can allow us to understand what are the mechanisms that allow sympatric species to exist with each other. So some of the conclusions of this research are that camera traps are a good and important tool to assess terrestrial fauna, and actually we encourage all these studies that focus on terrestrial mammals to use that the bird data some way. Because most of them like they just like don't want to identify them. Who cares about the bird? So also some of other recommendations that could be improved for prior studies is to either increase the grid of the study area and or also rotate the cameras to cover more habitats or area in general. More sampling effort if we want to assess for actually seasonal spatial dynamics over the year. I guess do this analysis within a period of 1 year. And definitely given the lack of studies of tinamous, we recommend more studies that focus on what are the mechanisms that allow their coexistence. Is time partitioning that mechanism, or it's another mechanism? And also to assess if different specific forest structures influence the habitat use of these birds, and definitely use occupancy estimation, because that accounts for the probability of non-detection that capture rates do not account for. So I just got the TCD field grant, so I'm going to be able to conduct some preliminary studies of my dissertation, and I will be focusing on understanding more what are the mechanisms that allow the coexistence of these tinamous at Los Amigos. And this is the study area, so we have all these 11 different species. So what I want to explore is, again, is there really a spatial segregation of tinamous? Is that like habitat partitioning the mechanism that allow their coexistence, or there are other mechanisms that have an influence on this? Also, if we have, for example, two tinamous that are using the same habitat type, how are they coexisting in both in the same habitat? Do they differ in body size, or also do they occupy the same home ranges, or their home ranges are different? Or probably acoustic cues are important for their segregation. So, and the other component I wanted to include for my dissertation is what is called ethnobiology, basically trying to understand the interactions of humans, animals, or plants. So I was able to conduct a study of the impacts of hunting in San Machigenga indigenous community in southeastern Peru, 2013. So they are communities that rely heavily on their natural resources. So I think like understanding the component of the human dimensions on study of wildlife is really important for conservation. So there is a lot of information about humans and mammals, but again, there is a lot of information about humans and birds. So we know that there is some sort of interaction between indigenous local people and birds. but to what extent, we don't know. So this is known as the field of ethno-ornithology, and I would like to address or include this component as a second chapter in my dissertation. So I will be working, hopefully, this summer. I'm just going to be presenting my project idea to the community and the president request for their permission. And if everything goes well, I hope to conduct the interviews the following year. So I'm going to be working with the Wakaria community that is over here. This is located at the edge of the Manu National Park in Cusco and Madre de Dios, and also with the Queros community that is part of the Amaracari Communal Reserve. So I will hope to integrate this component because I think it can promote effective conservation planning of different, and also integrate the local knowledge of indigenous people in any conservation action. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. And I think like I wouldn't have done anything of this without Emily, who was the person who helped me throughout my stay at Los Amigos. And really, so thank you very much.